Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy. On Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern, Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Welcome to Inspired Conversations. I'm your host, Mindset Elevation Coach, Linda Joy. I am so excited to have you here because, as you know, I love bringing you conversations that will inspire, support, and empower you in living your best life. I have a question for you, my friends. Is your inner advocate or your inner antagonist running your life? I bet you're wondering, I wonder what that could be. Well, when you discover the power of the RESCRIPT framework, you're going to learn to amplify the voice of your inner advocate and take positive action towards your personal and professional well-being. Joining me today is my dear friend, Dr. Colleen Georges, who I am blessed and honored to say is actually the cover feature of Aspire magazine, October-November issue. And with 25 years of expertise helping people transform their lives and careers, Colleen is a life and career coach, TEDx speaker, founder of RESCRIPT Your Story, and author of the 8-time award-winning book, RESCRIPT the Story You're Telling Yourself. She is also a Rutgers University lecturer in women's leadership. Dr. Colleen's expertise has been featured in various media, including News 12, Huffington Post, and Forbes, and she was recently selected as Top Life Coach of the Year for 2025 by the International Association of Top Professionals. She lives right here on the East Coast in New Jersey with a husband, son, and her 2 adorable cat daughters. Colleen, I'm so grateful that you joined me today. I always love our conversations.
Thank you so much for having me today. I know it's been, we've known each other a long time, and I'm excited to be here on your radio show.
Well, I got to tell you, I was part of your journey and watching the whole book unfold. And when I first heard you talking about and writing about like the inner antagonist and the inner advocate, I was like, oh my goodness, we all have both within us, right? And sometimes we're not aware which one is running the show. So before we dive in, let's just identify those 2 characters, as you may call them, so that our listeners can be brought into that conversation.
Sure. So, as you know, obviously, as you helped me through the process of, of getting this book together, making it a reality and getting it out there into the world. When I was first thinking about, kind of, again, it's a book very much about self-talk and goal setting and, really like what is it that happens in our minds? There's, we often refer to the inner critic, and I call this the inner antagonist because I think of self-talk in terms of stories, right? The stories we tell ourselves. And in any book, there's typically some type of antagonist, right? And it's the character in the book that is out to get the protagonist. It's out to cause problems, to get in their way, to tell them, why they can't do what they want to do, or to put them down, or to stop them from achieving something we want to achieve. So I really think of the negative voice in our head that catastrophizes, that worries, that ruminates over things, that tells us we're not good enough, as the inner antagonist, right? So it's the voice in our head that tells us why we're not enough, why we don't have what we need to do the things we want to do, and why we're never going to get there. Versus, I think the quieter voice for many of us is what I call the inner advocate. So, if we think of the word advocate, right, this is typically a person outside of us who would be supporting us, advocating for us in some way, helping us with the resources we need to achieve the things we want to achieve, being a listening ear, a support system. And I think too often we have this inner advocate inside of us, but it's this quiet little voice that needs to learn how to speak up and shut down this inner antagonist. It's the voice that when you need it says, "You got this, girl. I got you. You've done this before. Think of all the times that you got through a difficult time. You're going to be able to get through this, right?" It's the voice that we have right inside of us that can be our support system when maybe we don't have an outside support system, or maybe we just need to be our own support system in addition to the outside support system.
I'm sure every woman right now is saying, oh, yes. I know when my inner advocate is speaking, and I sure as hell know when my inner antagonist is speaking. I think we can all recognize those parts of ourselves. So, what inspired you to write your book, Rescript the Story You're Telling Yourself?
Yeah, so I had always known I wanted to write a book. I think from probably you know, uh, high school was when I started to realize that I wanted to write, that I enjoyed writing. And I think that dream sort of stayed with me and, had took a little few cracks at it over the years, as I think so many of us do. And then finally, got my inner advocate going for myself and really did the bulk of the writing, starting in like 16, 17, 18, and published in 19. But I knew it was a self-help book. I knew it was something to do with helping people see that they were enough as they are. But it was really in 2016 that it crystallized for me what exactly the book would be about, and Rescript was born. Uh, in 2016, I did a TED Talk at Rutgers University, where I teach and where I graduated from. And when we were told what the topic was going to be, the topic was stories. And I always recall that as soon as I got that email that said the topic or the theme was stories, the title of my talk came to me in a flash. And it was Rescripting the Stories We Tell Ourselves. Like I knew immediately, like, of course, stories for me is going to be about self-talk and how in the way we speak to ourselves and about ourselves to other people, we are stringing together a story that we end up sort of living out, right? Um, and so that was where the sort of title was born for the TED Talk, and then the book, Rescript the Story You're Telling Yourself, born out of that. And yeah, like in all the work that I do, both the career coaching and the life coaching work that I do, self-talk is always a part of it, regardless of whether we're working on personal goals or professional goals. We can get in our own way by shutting ourselves down and telling ourselves like, well, I just don't know if I'm the kind of person who could start a business, or I've thought about it, but I just don't know if I'm that kind of person. I just don't know if I'm the kind of person who could get up really early in the morning. I just don't know if I'm the kind of person who could do exercise every day, right? We tell ourselves all these things about who we are and who we're not. And then we believe them. And so we continue to sort of live out the story that we're telling ourselves. And it's just, I wanted to write a book that helped people think about, like, one, that story may not be true and probably isn't. And even if it has been true before, if you don't want to live that story anymore, you just got to tell yourself a different story and then live by the new one. And while it's not as easy as like, oh yeah, sure, we could all do that tomorrow, it's scary and you'll be afraid and it will be uncomfortable and it will take work and you'll stumble and it's not going to go perfectly, of course, but we have the power to rewrite it.
I think that is the most powerful part of your book, is it reminds us that we all have that power to change our story, to rewrite our story, to rescript, right?
Yeah.
And my life journey that's really, now that I'm listening to you, I'm like, that's what I've been doing, right, for 30 years. I changed the story of welfare mom, queen of self-sabotage, runaway, wrote a new story for myself. And I wish I had your book 30 years ago, it would have made it a lot easier. But the reason I share that is I'm no different than anyone. We can change our story. And what I love about your book is you give them the framework, the RESCRIPT framework.
Yeah.
So before we dive into this framework, I want to talk about I wanted them to understand that it's normal to have both voices, because I think a lot of times, I know I did, I judged myself every time I was hard on myself, which actually made that voice freaking louder. Well, what do you have to say about that before we take our first break?
Yeah, that everybody does, to different degrees, right? Some
Yes.
folks that are obviously extraordinarily hard on themselves in many different ways, and struggle much more deeply with it. Other folks, we can probably think of people in our lives that don't seem to be as tough on themselves, and tend to be a bit maybe more confident in a number of ways. But we all have our moments, and if there's anything I've come to realize in doing this work, especially I have a quiz that I created, and I give it to all of my clients, right before we start our work together. And 99% of folks have at least one area of self-talk that is in the negative self-talk that's in the high to very high range. And if really, I would say that 95% of the folks have way more than one area where they're really, really hard on themselves. And their inner antagonist is extremely loud and mean. So yeah, we all have it. And my story. And, for me, that was, true for me. I mean, I wasn't really, very happy with myself in high school, and in college, it got significantly worse. I had some really tough experiences with a couple of not so great relationships, and I got a DWI, and I lost my license, and had, awful grades, and, was just having a tough time, and became very self-loathing during that period of time. And, it took me, once I got to graduate school, like, just started to do a few different things. We'll probably talk about those things a bit, that helped me to rescript my own story.
Thank you for sharing that, because one of the things I love about doing this show, which is about to go into its 9th year, is I love when my guests are authentic and vulnerable and share that, hey, I may be doing this now, but I've been where you've been. And I think that's so powerful. So thank you. And we're going to take our first break, everybody, and we'll be back in a moment. In the meantime, I will invite you to check out Colleen's work, her books, her journals at ColleenGeorges.com. We'll be right back.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Inspiration for a woman's soul. Aspire Magazine, inspiring and supporting women on the path of self-discovery. Claim your free digital subscription today, which includes access to thousands of dollars of personal development bonus gifts from Team Inspiration partners. Claim your Aspire Magazine subscription today at subscribetoaspire.com.
Consistently attract soulmate clients, begin showing up on brand, monetizing on your calling. Welcome all spiritual coaches, leaders, healers, light workers, and practitioners to a show that turns you on in your business and amplifies your magnetism. I'm host, catalyst, and spiritual business coach Rosalind Fung, and I'm here to journey with you into the juicy and help you discover where the real gaps are. Ignite your mindset and soul with strategies and systems as each episode takes you to the sweet spot that activates your soulgasmic business by tuning in on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Mountain. Join me for your light language activation, and let's magnetize and monetize.
Your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, my friend. You're listening to Inspired Conversations. With me today is my good friend, Dr. Colleen Georges, author of RESCRIPT the Story You're Telling Yourself. And that's what we're talking about today, is how to change that conversation, that internal conversation that could be sabotaging your happiness, success, and well-being. So, Colleen, in the book, you break down the RESCRIPT framework as an acronym, and it's broken down into 8 practices. So, do you want to guide us through those?
Yeah, sure. So the quick, kind of overview is, so RESCRIPT um, is an acronym, and each chapter of the book goes through each of the letters. So the first R is release rumination. The E is engage growth goals. The S is seek strengths. The C is challenge catastrophizing. The second R is restrict regrets. The I is invite imperfection. The P is pursue passion and purpose. And the T is think thankfully.
I have to tell you, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
because when you're going through the framework, is it a framework that we follow in order, or do we start where we are? How does the RESCRIPT framework, how do you guide us in going through it?
Yeah, it's really a framework versus a step-by-step process. So I think, I mentioned I have a quiz, which is towards the very beginning of the book. And it just, kind of helps to get a sense of where you're at. And, based on that, if you feel like there's certain areas that you're, that are less challenging for you, you might want to say, oh, I don't maybe need to spend as much time on this chapter, and maybe I want to jump into challenge catastrophizing because I was really high on that. That's one of my, personal. I always call myself a recovering catastrophizer. So,
I
but
am
yeah,
with you. I
yeah.
am with you, girl. I am with you. And another one that jumped out at me that let's talk about this one, because I have clients, friends, peers who are like, Linda, I just keep focusing on the same stuff. So release rumination. You know that thing about replaying what happened or what you should have said or what you should have done over and over again, which means you're not in the present moment and you're stuck in a story. So share some of the symptoms of what that may look like in case someone's not sure what that would look like.
Yeah. So, rumination, and you described it really well, Linda. So it's the moments in our life where we are thinking over and over, and as you said, replaying different scenarios and conversations we've had with people over and over again. And some people might call it analysis paralysis, right? When we're just analyzing it and we're not doing anything about it. We're just thinking about it and analyzing it and saying, what were they thinking when they made this face? Or, are they mad at me? Or why did I do that? Why do I always feel like that? And it could be a situation where something negative happened, like, it was an argument, or it was, a situation where something happened, like, I don't know, maybe we went on a job interview and somebody made a not so nice remark, or they immediately said, oh, I'm sorry, you're not the right person for this job. But it could also be ambiguous situations, right? So we also ruminate over things that we're unsure of. In fact, I think we spend a lot of time doing that, right? We're trying to look for the answer. If I just dig and dig and dig, I can make sense out of this ambiguous situation if I just analyze it and think about it over and over and over again. But we do get sort of paralyzed in the thinking and don't move it into doing.
I think we can all relate to
Yeah.
this. And I love that the book, every chapter, they also have questions you can ask yourself. And I had written down one of them for the rumination. And one of them that you wrote is, what action within my control will I take right now to address this situation? Because as you said a moment ago, a lot of times we ruminate, but we're not moving energy. We're not doing anything. We're just stuck in a circle. So that question automatically made me feel like, okay, now if I take action, I can actually change this circumstance instead of being a victim of my own mind, playing it over and over.
Exactly, right? So what I often, I think of probably all the things that I utilize with clients. Um, the biggest one of the biggest ones is that it's when you're finding yourself in a situation where you are ruminating over something, as soon as you realize that you're doing it, and we, sometimes that could be minutes, it could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, that we were doing that. But as soon as you realize that you're ruminating over something, I think it's good to kindly say to yourself and say your name. You could say like, Colleen, stop. And then, what do you control in this situation? And then really think, like, is there something I have control over that I might be able to take action on? And then what is the first thing I can do right now or quickly, soon, in order to, exert some control or action in this situation? And that could be, I send a text message or an email to somebody to ask a question or to whatever, to get some clarification on something that I'm wondering about. Or maybe it's I need to look something up or research something, or I need to go somewhere or whatever. But if there's something that we have control over, we have to ask ourselves, like, what is that? And let me try to take action on that as quickly as possible. And as the rest of it is that, intrusive thoughts are, they're intrusive, right? So they come without our permission. And that's what intrusive means. And so when those intrusive ruminating thoughts come back and try to make us analyze and ponder and wonder and why and do all the things again, we just have to say like, no, I've done everything I can, to take action on this situation, and we're not going to think about this anymore. And they will try to come back over and over again. And if we come up with some kind of kind mantra for ourselves, no, we've taken care of that. We're doing this right now. Eventually, the inner antagonist stays quiet.
Yeah, and there's something you wrote in there. You said by redirecting our energy from over analysis, during the rumination phase to actionable steps, we can regain our focus and peace of mind. And, as soon as you read that statement, it just brings me right back into my body. One of the things I do, like if I catch myself like making a statement that isn't for my highest good, I immediately stop and put my hand on my heart and go, Linda, is that the truth of who you are? And because I word it in that way, the answer always is inviting my soul to respond. And of course, my soul says, no, that's not the truth of who you are. And I can immediately come back into my body. I think that brings me into my heart when I do that.
Yeah.
It makes me just stop, like, that's it's a nicer way of saying, that's a big lie.
Right, right.
I just, instead of wording that way, I go, Linda, is that the truth of who you are? It makes me remember, hey, sometimes what you call our inner antagonist can tell some big fibs, right?
Oh yeah, I think
And it keeps us small. It keeps us stuck. It keeps us in fear.
yes.
And so that's why I love that you cover this throughout the book about quieting that part of us down so our inner advocate can start leading the
Yeah.
way and guiding our life.
Yeah.
And your next one is well, one of the ones I love too that really spoke to me is the seek strengths. Because
Yeah.
when I read that you said most people can quickly list their flaws but struggle to identify their talents, I'm like, oh my God, it's so true, isn't it? You talk to your girlfriends, it's like they're telling you everything that's wrong with themselves instead of
Yeah.
celebrating the essence of who they are. Or that means the the inner antagonist is running the show behind the scenes, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of like it's something I pick up on a lot pretty quickly when I'm working with clients is you can hear it in the way people talk. They'll say, I was kind of touching upon it before, but they'll just say, oh, I just never been good at whatever, and then they mention a thing. Yeah, I'm just really disorganized. Yeah, I'm just really lazy. I've always been lazy. It's just that part of that story we tell ourselves is telling ourselves things that we think we're not good at, right? And we can name them so easily. We can so easily that we don't even hear, I think, the way that we speak to other people about ourselves. But that's exactly the same things we're telling ourselves every day. The way that we tell other people about ourselves and our lives is being reflected in the conversation we're having with ourselves in our quiet time, right? So, and often it really is like ways we knock ourselves down and we tell ourselves all the things we think are like our perceived weaknesses. But like, how often do we really say, like, you know, you're like a kick-ass writer, or you're a pretty good human, like, like how often do we even, or like whether it's an overarching character trait or a very specific strength, like how often do we say those things to ourselves? And because, as I've been doing career coaching for like 20 plus years now. I work obviously on resumes and things like that. And I think it comes up so much in like resume writing and interview preparation, just being prepared to tell other people about what we're great at. It can be so hard for people to come up with those things. It's like their list is so small. And we really have to like dig and assess to really say, like, well, what do other people come to me for? What do other people say I'm great at? What do people seek help from me for? What if supervisors, noted that I'm really strong at? Or maybe I should take a strengths assessment and see, what that says about me.
It's so important too. It's so funny because I may not recognize it in myself when I'm doing it, which you kind of implied. But like if I'm talking to a friend, I'm like, oh my God, she's beating herself up and putting herself down. I can notice it in a moment and recalibrate my clients. But then I go, wait a minute, we don't do that for ourselves as often as we should, to see
Right.
that we're having that self-talk. So I think that was so important that you said it, is also taking the information from others. Like when you get a compliment, someone's seeing your strength.
Exactly.
And I think it's so hard for us to own our gifts and our strengths, because I think many of us were brought up with, that's bragging, don't talk about
Yep.
yourself. And we're going to take a break, Colleen. Let's come back, talk about that. And then I want to talk about letter C, challenge
Oh,
catastrophizing, because that's a big one.
oh yeah.
We'll be back in a moment, my friends. Stay with us. We have lots of great strategies, insights coming from Dr. Colleen Georges. Make sure you go visit her, check out her book, Rescript the Story You're Telling Yourself, as well as some amazing journals that she has on her site at ColleenGeorges.com. We'll be back in a moment.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Your truest, deepest desires are calling you. The question is, will you answer the call? Former high-tech Fortune 500 leader Sharon Seberg knows how it feels to wear busyness as a badge of honor and to smother her dreams with the expectations of others. Walking away from her successful yet unfulfilling career, she chose to live a life connected to her intuitive wisdom and divine truth, and now lives a life of fulfillment, peace, and abundance. Today, Sharon is a neurotransformational coach, feminine power facilitator, and the visionary founder of the Soul Alignment Formula. She empathetically fuses cutting-edge neuroscience with intuitive coaching, supporting successful women to unlock their full potential so they can live a life of authenticity and freedom. Are you ready to excavate your deepest desires and bring them to life? Start by visiting SharonSeberg.com.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
To get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
walk a mile in my shoes.
walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out, and for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of Times Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of Times. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Times Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, my friends. So, Colleen, right before the break, we were talking about recognizing our strengths, which is part of the seeking strengths part of your framework. And right as we went to break, I realized that, a lot of us have been trained to not, I don't want to say talk about ourselves, but celebrate ourselves. Like, oh, don't brag. But really, what we want to do is recognize all those things. So do you think that we struggle with recognizing our strengths because we've picked up the story that it's, not polite?
That's exactly it. I talk about that in the book that, it's what you said. Most people were brought up either by parents or teachers or other, authority figures or even peers saying things like, don't brag about yourself, don't have a big ego, don't be narcissistic, or any time, like, I think kids are more, when they're younger, before they get these messages, are more likely to say things like, it's not crazy, right? You hear a little 4-year-old say like, I'm really good at dancing, or I'm really great at gymnastics. It's natural. Like, little kids haven't been, sort of tainted right yet when they're really tiny, like 3-4 years old, with that idea that we don't do that. Oh, no, 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 never say you're good at something. God forbid we were to do that. But as soon as we start to hear that, we get embarrassed. We're like, oh, that's bad. It's bad to tell people that I'm good at something. And I think we take that message and then we sort of which I think is the truth of the inner antagonist overall. We take the messages that we get from parents, family, teachers, peers, other authority figures, and then we amplify it, right? So maybe it was meant to stay in a particular context. Maybe the teacher said, you didn't really do a great job on this math test, Linda, and then suddenly now Linda is 30 and telling people like, oh, no, I could never do a job with numbers. I'm really bad at math. And we don't even realize that like that originated somewhere, but we just took it to a whole nother level. So it's absolutely generated from voices from other people, and then we expand upon it.
Oh yeah, my sister for years, she's 2 years younger, and yes, I have permission to share this story, my friend. So all our lives, she had a story. I am not creative. Linda's the creative one. And I painted for 30 years and took art classes and all that. But she had that story until about 6 years ago, so early 50s. And I always said to her, I said, you are creative, but she was falling into comparison. Why should I even try? Because Linda has that gift. And I think a lot of us do it. But she put herself out of her comfort zone, and she went to one of those, I'll call it paint and sip parties with her friends.
Yep.
I don't know what that did, but girl, she ignited her inner artist. And now she's done crafts and tried new things that for 50 years she had told herself a story that she couldn't do it, Colleen.
Wow.
And that's just one example of a story that we can create from childhood that carries on and permeates the rest of our life. And look how much, she said, Lynn, I lost so much joy. I didn't realize what I was missing because of that story. Isn't that true for so many of us, Colleen?
Yeah. So it's lighting up my story here. So when I was little, I was like the kid who had friends in the classroom, but the kid who like lost all the friends in gym class.
Oh yeah, I know that. I know that story.
Yeah. So it's in the book. But that really, like, I carried that to the point where I just took on this idea that I'm not athletic, hence I'm physically lazy, and I carried that through adulthood. So much so that anytime I even tried to go to a gym, exercise at home, do any sort of physical activity to the most basic level, I would be like, yeah, I can't do things like that. I'm just lazy. So I took not being great at sports, which is what it was, which is still true of me, which is fine. I don't like them and they don't like me, and that's just fine. Um, and maybe if I tried, I could get better, but I'm not interested. But point being, I wasn't great at baseball or I wasn't great at football. Like that was challenging for me. I took that to be, I'm not athletic, hence I'm lazy and I can't do anything that is physically active. And so I finally kicked that in 2021, right? So just a few years ago, the age of 45 years old or 46 years old, I finally just was like, I don't want to tell this story to myself anymore. This is not working for me. I'm not going to live the rest of my life like, going like, oh, you're lazy. You can't exercise, Colleen. Like that's not going to do good for me. So I changed it and I walk every day. I'm on the treadmill every day. No, I don't play sports, don't like them, don't want to, but I found my way of being physically active and learned that no, I'm not a lazy person. And, you know, I think so many people out there can think of at least one thing that, is like the thing they've told themselves they're not good at, or that's just not me for the large majority of their lives, that maybe there's something in there where maybe you'd like to not tell yourself that story anymore. Maybe there's something in there that, you feel if I shifted it, I could add value and enrich my life in some way. And sometimes it's just as easy as not telling yourself that and not telling other people's that anymore.
Yeah, and I'll side note, your story resonates with me, and I've witnessed your journey. You are outside all the time now, but more than just being outside all the time and going for your walks, you light up now. You have connected to nature. You gave
Yeah.
yourself that gift, and now isn't it a beautiful ripple effect? Because I know that not only do you bring your son, but you bring your nieces and family, and now you're
Yeah.
giving that love of what you thought you weren't good at to
Yeah.
them. And it's
It's
rewriting the
crazy.
story.
It's crazy to me that the thing that I carried with me as I can't do stuff like that has now become the thing that brings me the most joy in my life, both when I'm alone as well as in connecting with people I love.
Yeah, and I want everyone to hear that, right? Because imagine carrying a story for 40 something years. You might have convinced yourself, I can't change it. This has been who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And Colleen is living proof just in this one example, as well as many other examples that she shares in the book, that it doesn't matter how long you've been telling yourself a story, you do have the power to change it. And the Rescript the Story You're Telling Yourself book gives you the framework to do that, and the exercises and the support. And same with me. I could still be living that story that I was living 35 years ago. But I didn't want that life. I didn't know how I would change. As I said, I wish Colleen's book was available back then. It would have made things a lot easier. So I want to nip that story in the bud, that it doesn't matter how long you've been telling yourself a story. The power is within you.
Yep.
And we have another moment before we take our final break. But what piece of guidance, if someone is feeling like they can't change a habit or belief? Any insight there, Colleen?
Hmm. I think obviously one of the first places is to really look back at your life and to think about, have there been times where you have changed something that was surprising to you, something that, you really thought was true of you and you made a big stride and now you feel like you're in a different place, or you're maybe even like perceive yourself as a different person in this particular capacity. I think for most people can think of at least one thing and probably more things if we really sit there. Now, being honest, if we're in a really dark place and we're going through some difficult times, especially for those folks who are maybe, clinically depressed, it can be really hard to think of, like when have I made a change, or have there been times in my life where, I've achieved something or changed or transformed. It can be really, really difficult to do that. So obviously, like, I think it's important to, in those times, work with a therapist, and maybe also work with a coach simultaneously on other things. But for most of us, I think that it's first identifying the ways in which we've already made changes in our life. Because if we were able to do it in one area, we clearly figured out a way to do it. We can probably gain some ideas from how we've done it before to how we could do it again.
That's a powerful strategy because we've all had at least one thing we've changed in our lives. We're going to take a final break, my friends. I invite you to visit ColleenGeorges.com, learn more about Colleen's work, follow her on social media, and of course, grab a copy of RESCRIPT, the Story You're Telling Yourself. It's time to write a new story, my friends. We'll be back.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Are you ready to create and live the divinely guided life intended for you? A life not bound by your past or tied to a specific future. A life beyond your fears and what-ifs that is filled with limitless possibilities. Experiencing an empowered life of fulfillment, joy, and connection is possible when you embrace a spiritual solutions-centered lifestyle. Through her transformational teachings and programs, Lisa Hermata, empowered life view guide, life transformation mentor, and founder of Love is the Seed, empowers women to break the barriers holding them back from living their sacred truth so they can find greater connection with their inner wisdom and their divine source to co-create a life that brings peace, joy, and self-acceptance. Visit loveistheseed.com for positive guidance and valuable resources to support you in embracing an empowered life view.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Hey, hon, what you doing with your phone? Taking pictures?
No. I'm asking it questions.
Like what?
Hey, Bobo, do flowers have best friends?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, follow me. I want to show you something. Look, flowers do have best friends.
Whoa.
Some answers can only be found in nature. Discover the unsearchable. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a trail near you. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back. You're listening to Inspired Conversations. With me today is Dr. Colleen Georges, author of RESCRIPT, the Story You're Telling Yourself. So in this last segment, I want to talk a little bit about letter C, which is challenge catastrophizing, because I was the ruminator, and all my ruminating was about worst case scenarios. It didn't matter what it was. And it was like I was writing a story in my mind of things that I was projecting forward that, of course, I had no control over, Colleen, and was 99.9% of the time was never going to happen. But it was affecting my health, my energy, my mindset. Is this one you see a lot of people, especially in today's world, struggling with?
Oh, yeah. Right. I mean, I rarely meet somebody that is, and I think it's probably even more common with women that I work with. If you ask somebody like, are you a worrier? A lot of people would raise their hands and say like, oh yeah, I'm totally a worrier. So catastrophizing is like worry times 5,000, right? It's taking worry to the level of something happens and we have spun several immediately, those of us who, are talented catastrophizers. And I like to say that there is a positive flip side to being a talented catastrophizer, meaning I think those who are talented catastrophizers are also, one, creative, and two, able to strategize well because we can think forward and think about possibilities. So we can take that gift that is also a curse, but turn it into a gift and use it for positive things. However, when it's catastrophizing and it's not so positive, it can immediately whip out and string 5, 6, 7, 10 different possible awful scenarios associated with whatever it is you're catastrophizing about. And then it can take that catastrophe and then give you the next one, right? So it goes from, I failed this test to I am, you know, I'm obviously like I failed the test. I'm obviously going to fail this class. I mean, if I fail this class, like, well, I mean, clearly then like this isn't the right major for me. I'm not going to be able to now I'm not going to be able to I failed chemistry, so now I'm not going to be able to be a doctor. So and if I'm not able to be a doctor, then my parents are totally going to be disappointed in me. And then like if I can't be a doctor, like I'm going to have a meaningless life, obviously. So we can take a failing of a test, and now suddenly our parents are disappointed in us and we have a meaningless life. Right? So that's just one example.
Yeah, but I was giggling because like, oh my God, I've been there. And
Yeah.
one of the things I love too is in that section, throughout the whole book, you ask almost like you give them questions, you give the readers questions to help them understand and try to break the patterns. In this case, we're talking about catastrophizing. And one of the questions I love that really kind of stops you in the thoughts when you're in that, and the question was, what evidence, Linda, do you have that supports this catastrophizing thought? So the moment I read that, I was like, it makes you stop and think like, well, I don't have any evidence. Right. So it automatically, doesn't it energetically kind of stop you? And then I love that you said, after reviewing your evidence, what revisions do you want to make to your conclusions? Because I think stopping the habitual thought patterns as we're catastrophizing is so key, because if not, you go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And your life is over by the time you're done with the story you're telling yourself. And the other thing is that sure in hell doesn't feel good. It takes away your inner peace, as Colleen and I both know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make you fun to be around because they're like, what are you talking about? You failed the test. But inside us, our world has just ended because we've made a story up about that test. So that was a perfect example I'm sure many of us can relate to. So what if someone does find themselves in the middle of that thought process?
There's so many different things we can do. But I think that, one is certainly, as you said, right, what evidence do I have to support that this catastrophe is likely or could be or could come true? Most of the time, we're not going to find a lot of evidence. Sometimes we might find some, but the reality is we generally find that there isn't a lot of support for this, and this scenario that we're weaving is highly unlikely. And we can also do other things. I mean, sometimes and as we think about evidence, right, we can look back to the situation and say, well, what else has happened that would indicate that this awful, terrible thing is going to happen? Okay, this happened. No, that doesn't seem like it could be as bad as I'm thinking, right? So usually, if we allow ourselves to, if we could, and that's another thing I almost want to say, like as far as strategy, you think about if somebody else was telling this to you, what would you be thinking if it was your friend or your sister or whatever that was telling you about this scenario? Would you go, oh yeah, you're absolutely going to have a miserable life and our parents will hate you? Like, is that what you would say? Because in all likelihood, if it was somebody else, you would be able to see it more clearly, and you probably wouldn't think it was going to turn out that terrible. So sometimes that's another useful thing to do. And as wild as it might sound, other strategies are, well, what would I do? So what is the worst case scenario? Let's think about it. And it's upsetting to think about usually, but so what would I do if that worst case scenario happened? What would I do? Like, and
So then you look
usually,
at
right? Yeah,
solutions, right? That puts you
right,
in solution focus and off the rabbit hole that they were falling in.
right, right. To try to think like, what can I do about it? But really, it's not with the idea that we want to stay and the idea that the terrible thing is going to happen and I'm going to have to do these things. But it does help us regain a sense of control because I think that, and obviously there's an eye for invite imperfection because I think that those who are high in perfectionism um, also tend to be, stronger in their catastrophizing because there's a desire to get it right all the time, never let anyone down. Nobody should ever be disappointed in you, and so whenever any of these things happen and there is something is that success is not met to the bar that we had for ourselves, we can, weave the story of how this is going to ruin everything.
Yeah, I mean, this is all resonating. One of the ways for me is I remind myself when I get into that cycle and I'm like, oh no, I remind myself, Linda, you've been through 1,000 worst case scenarios in your life at this point, and you've made it through every one.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we think back in our life, there were so many scenarios that we fell into catastrophizing on, and 99% of them didn't even happen. So now I just give myself credit, Lynn. No matter what happens, you've already proven how strong you are, how resilient you are, how courageous you are, because you already lived through all your worst case scenarios. And it reminds me to just come back to center. And oh God, this conversation could keep on going, girl.
For real.
Yeah, sometimes Colleen and I get together on these topics and they were like, oh shoot, look at the time. I want to invite everyone as I come into a close. Visit Colleen's website. Check out her blog. She has beautiful journals. And of course, I want you to get this book, Rescript the Story You're Telling Yourself. If anything, even one little nudge of this conversation today gave you an insight into some stories that you may be telling yourself, or maybe your inner antagonist is running the show, why keep going down that path when help is a click away? So I invite you to visit ColleenGeorges.com and make sure you follow her on social media. Colleen, any last minute message that you want to leave them with? We have about 45 seconds or so.
Yeah, I think the final thing I would say is that it's always important for us to, um, I think two things I could think of. One, my final part of Rescript is think thankfully, and I always, as you know, believe that a gratitude practice is always an important part of anyone's life and can be healing in so many different ways. I think it can be very healing for anxiety. It can be healing for being more hopeful. But I also think it can help us feel better about ourselves and our lives. I believe that part of a gratitude practice should include what am I grateful for that I accomplished today? And it is really as simple as I don't mean like I got the job or I made the move or whatever. That's good too. But it's things like I finally made the doctor's appointment today. I finally texted my friend that I hadn't texted for 2 weeks. I finally did it. Like have moments at the end of your day or whatever in your day where you say, I'm grateful for these little things that I did, like that I accomplished these little things, or even the big things too. But I think it's important to acknowledge the little ways that we have successes every day, because I think that that promotes the inner antagonist. It promotes confidence. It helps us rescript our stories in a positive way, and that again, to amplify the inner advocate in other ways, it's finding little things you can say to yourself in the moments where you just, you're struggling. And I think having like a few little mantras that just work for you, like for me, like I'll say things like, I joke that maybe it's because I'm a Gemini and I, have the other twin in there, but I think of myself as two people sometimes, but it's really the inner advocate, the inner antagonist. But like I'll say, I got you, girl. I'm not going to let you fall.
That's beautiful. I think it's so important that we have that conversation with ourselves. And I'm so grateful that you joined me today, Colleen. And I want to invite everyone one more time, get on over to ColleenGeorges.com and tap into her wisdom, her strategies, and everything that she has available on her site. And until next time, my friends, choose love, choose joy, choose happiness. Blessings, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy. Join our sacred space every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern and meet leading female visionaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. Inspired Conversations with Linda Joy is a soulful venue where guests share the obstacles they've overcome, along with wisdom and lessons learned on their personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic and soulful living.